The divorce papers landed on the marble conference table with a sound so soft it should have meant nothing. It meant everything. Serena Hale did not flinch. She did not look up immediately. She let the silence stretch 3 seconds, 4, while the room held its breath around her. Then slowly, she lifted her eyes to the man sitting across from her, the man who had once pressed his lips to her temple on a rainy Tuesday morning and told her she was the only thing in his life. That made sense. Daniel Hale looked at her the way he looked at quarterly reports. Assessed. Dismissed. "Sign it," he said, not please, not I'm sorry, not even the courtesy of pretending this was difficult. "Just sign it." Serena looked down at the document. 40. 3 pages. 3 years of marriage reduced to the thickness of a legal brief. She could see his lawyer in her peripheral vision, a sharp-faced woman in a charcoal blazer who had the particular stillness of someone being paid very well to witness someone else's humiliation. She picked up the pen. Daniel's jaw shifted just barely. A flicker of something. Surprise, maybe, that she wasn't going to fight. That there were no tears, no raised voice, no desperate plea across the cold expanse of Italian marble. Serena signed every page. She signed them slowly, deliberately, as though she were signing a contract for something she wanted. When she reached the final page, she set the pen down with a small, precise click, pushed the papers back across the table, and stood. "I hope," she said quietly, "that whatever you're running toward is worth what you're leaving behind." Daniel said nothing. She walked out. She did not cry in the elevator. She did not cry in the black car that carried her through the rain, slicked streets of Manhattan. She sat with her hands folded in her lap and watched the city blur past the window and thought about the first morning she had woken up in Daniel's penthouse, how the light had come through the floor to ceiling glass like something holy, and how she had believed, truly, completely believed that she was standing at the beginning of something extraordinary. She had been right about that. She just hadn't understood yet what kind of extraordinary it would turn out to be. That was 14 months ago. The world Daniel Hale had believed he controlled the board seats, the acquisition deals, the careful architecture of power he had spent a decade constructing, began to shift 6 weeks after she walked out of that conference room. It began with a name, Marcus Reed. Most people in New York's financial corridors knew the name the way they knew about weather patterns. Something distant, enormous, and entirely beyond their influence. Marcus Reed did not attend galas. He did not give interviews. He appeared in Forbes lists the way mountains appear in landscapes, simply, massively, as though they had always been there and always would be. He was 30, 8 years old. He had built his first company at 20, 2 from a server room in Singapore, and sold it 4 years later for a number that made seasoned investors go quiet. He had done it again and again, each time larger, each time quieter. He moved through the financial world like a current beneath the surface. You didn't see him coming until your boat was already turning. Nobody knew much about his private life. There were rumors, as there always are with men of that particular magnitude. A brief engagement years ago to a woman who had never spoken publicly about it. A reputation for loyalty that was fierce and absolute, and an equal reputation for coldness toward those who broke his trust. What nobody knew, what nobody could have predicted, was that Marcus Reed had been watching Serena. Not in the way that word implies something sinister, in the way that a man who has spent his entire adult life moving too fast to look at anything closely sometimes stops, finally, and sees something that makes him understand he has been moving in wrong direction. He had met her 8 months before the divorce, at a charity event in a midtown hotel ballroom that smelled of white roses and ambition. She had been standing at the edge of the room with a glass of champagne she wasn't drinking, and there had been something about her stillness in a room full of performance and noise that had pulled his attention and held it. He had learned her name from his assistant the following morning. He had not acted on it. She was married. That was a wall he did not cross, but he had remembered. And when, 14 months after that evening, his lawyer mentioned in passing that Serena Hale, formerly Serena Voss, architect turned property developer, quietly building something interesting in the sustainable design space, had finalized her divorce from Daniel Hale. Marcus Reed had set down his coffee cup and looked out at the New York skyline for a long moment. Then he had said, "Get me a meeting." Serena did not know any of this when she walked into the lobby of the Reed Capitol building on a Tuesday morning in October. She knew only that she had received an invitation, formally worded, professionally delivered, requesting her presence for a consultation regarding a development project in Lower Manhattan. The project was real. She had researched it thoroughly. A mixed-use sustainable development on the waterfront, the kind of project that appeared in architectural journals as a concept and almost never made it to ground breaking. The kind of project she had been quietly, relentlessly positioning herself to work on for 3 years. She had dressed carefully, not to impress, she was past that particular anxiety, but with the quiet armor of a woman who understood that what she wore was a form of communication. A slate, gray wool dress, precise and architectural in its cut, her dark hair pulled back, small gold earrings. Nothing extra, nothing unnecessary. The lobby of Reed Capitol was all glass and pale stone, very high ceilings, the kind of deliberate restraint that costs more than most people's homes. A receptionist with the practiced calm of someone who managed important people's proximity to other important people directed her to the 42nd floor. The elevator opened into an anteroom where a man in his early 30s, her age, give or take, rose to greet her. His name was James. He was Marcus Reed's chief of staff, she would learn later, and he had a quality she found immediately reassuring. He spoke to her like she was there for a reason, not like she was an appointment. "Be managed? Mr. Reed is ready for you," James said, and opened a door. The office was large without being aggressive about it. The view was simply the city, the river, the bridges, the October sky going golden in the late morning. There were bookshelves, real ones, with books that had clearly been read, a desk that was big but not ostentatious, a glass of water on a side table, still cold, the condensation just beginning. Marcus Reed stood at the window with his back to her when she entered. He did not turn immediately. She had 1 second, too, to study the line of his shoulders, the way he stood, the quality of his stillness. It was not the stillness of someone lost in thought. It was the stillness of someone who had decided to turn around on his own schedule and was perfectly comfortable with that decision. Then he turned. He was taller than she had expected. She was not sure why she had expected anything specific, with dark hair beginning to silver at the temples in a way that suited him severely. His face was the kind that photographers love for its geometry, strong jaw, sharp attention, something deeply watchful in his eyes. He wore a charcoal suit, no tie, and he looked at her with an expression that was professionally neutral and somehow, underneath that neutrality, intensely focused. "MS, Hale," he said. His voice was even, not warm exactly, but not cold either, the voice of a man who had learned to keep his register carefully controlled. "Mr. Reed," she said. She did not smile first. She did not perform the small social lubricants that women in rooms like this were often expected to provide, the easy warmth, the deference, the subtle signal of gratitude for being included. She met his eyes and waited. Something moved across his face so briefly she almost missed it. "Please," he said, gesturing to the chair across from his desk. "Sit down." The meeting lasted 40 minutes. It was, on its surface, entirely professional. He asked precise questions about her experience in sustainable design. She gave precise answers. He mentioned the waterfront project in terms that suggested significant ambition. A development that would not merely be environmentally responsible, but would redefine what responsible urban development could look like, architecturally and structurally. She found herself leaning forward without intending to, the professional part of her brain lighting up with a focus she hadn't felt in months. But there was something else happening in that room. It moved beneath the surface of the conversation, like a current beneath ice, present, felt, but not yet visible. It was in the way he paused a half second longer than necessary after she answered a question. as though he were doing something else with what she'd said besides filing it professionally. It was in the way she became aware, sometime around the 20-minute mark, that she had forgotten to be guarded. That realization landed on her like cold water. She sat back slightly, reintroduced the professional distance. He noticed she was certain of it, though his expression didn't change. When the meeting ended and James appeared in the doorway, the signal clearly well rehearsed. Marcus Reed stood and extended his hand across the desk. She shook it. His grip was firm, brief, and as their hands separated, there was a moment, a fraction of a second, where neither of them had quite let go. "We'll be in touch," he said. "I'll look forward to it," she replied. She rode the elevator down to the lobby, walked out into the October air, and stood on the sidewalk for a moment with her face tilted up toward the thin fall sunlight. She told herself the feeling in her chest was professional excitement. She was not entirely convinced. She got the contract. The official notification arrived 4 days later, and it was everything she had hoped it would be: scope, timeline, creative control, resources. Her assistant, Priya, let out a small shriek when she read the figures. Serena read it twice, calmly, and then made a cup of tea and sat with it in her office while the city moved beyond the windows. She should have felt purely triumphant. She mostly did. What complicated the triumph was a message that arrived separately, in a simple email from James, noting that Mr. Reed hoped she would be available for a working dinner the following Thursday to align on the project's philosophical direction before the design phase began. Working dinner. Serena held the phrase up to the light of her own attention and examined it carefully. She wrote back that Thursday worked. She did not overthink it, or she tried not to. She was 34 years old and had been through a marriage that had quietly eroded something in her, not her strength, which had survived intact, but her willingness to lean toward anyone without bracing for the impact. She had learned in the years with Daniel that warmth could be a debt that gets called in at the worst possible time. She was not going to be foolish. She was just going to have a working dinner. The restaurant was in the West Village, small, serious, the kind of place with no sign on the door and a menu that changed daily. Marcus was already there when she arrived, standing at the bar in a dark suit, a glass of something amber in his hand. He saw her the moment she walked in, and he straightened almost imperceptibly. Almost. They were seated at a corner table. Candles, the low conversation of other serious diners. The smell of something extraordinary coming from the kitchen. She waited for the professional framing to begin, the project timeline, the design philosophy, the parameters she needed to understand. Instead, he picked up his menu, glanced at it briefly, set it down, and looked at her. "Before we talk about the project," he said, "I want to ask you something." She felt her attention sharpen. "All right." "When I first saw you 8 months before your divorce, you were at the Greenfield Foundation event. You were standing at the edge of the room, and you looked like someone who had decided to stop, pretending to enjoy themselves. The silence that followed was absolute. You remember that?" she said. It was not quite a question. "I remember it very clearly." She looked at him across the candlelight. Looked for the angle, the manipulation dressed as honesty. The performance of directness that men with his kind of power sometimes deployed because it worked. She was good at detecting that particular pretense. She had been trained on it. She didn't find it. "What's your question?" she said. "I want to know if you're all right." He said simply, not professionally, "I know you're doing extraordinary work. I mean everything else." The candlelight moved between them. Serena was quiet for a long moment. Outside, a cab moved through the narrow street. Someone laughed at another table. In the small, warm world of the restaurant, the question sat between them like something fragile and absolutely real. "I'm better than I was," she said finally. "I'm not yet where I'm going." He nodded once, as though that answer meant exactly as much as she had intended it to mean. "That," he said quietly, "is the most honest answer I've heard in a very long time." She did not expect what happened 3 weeks later. She had fallen into a rhythm with the project, long days in her studio. Evenings sometimes running long at Reed Capital, when the design reviews required his direct input. He was precise, demanding, and she was discovering occasionally, unexpectedly, funny in a way that was dry and slight enough that she almost missed it the first few times. She did not miss it. She also noticed that he ate very little at the working dinners that had become a quiet weekly ritual. That he kept the temperature in his office 3 degrees cooler than was comfortable and seemed unaware of it. That he had a habit, when he was thinking hard about something, of touching the second finger of his left hand to his thumb, barely visibly, like a small private counting. She noticed these things the way you notice things you don't mean to notice. The thing that happened 3 weeks later was not romantic. It was simpler and, because of its simplicity, more destabilizing. She was working late in the conference room, 2 floors below his office, spread across the long table with blueprints and environmental impact models, and 3 empty coffee cups. It was past 9, the building had gone quiet around her. She had not eaten since noon. Marcus appeared in the doorway. He was not supposed to be there. She had thought he'd left hours ago. He looked at the table, at the coffee cups. At her, he said nothing. He disappeared. 12 minutes later, he came back with takeout from the Japanese place 3 blocks away, the same place she mentioned offhandedly had been her weekly ritual for 4 years, the place she'd said she hadn't been back to since the divorce because Daniel had hated it, and somehow it had gotten lost in the architecture of their life together. He set the bag on the corner of the table away from her blueprints and said, "You mentioned it 3 weeks ago, in passing." Then he sat down across from her and opened his laptop as though nothing had happened. Serena looked at the bag. She looked at him. He was already focused on a screen. She opened the bag. Inside were, specifically, her order. The one she always got. The one she had mentioned, yes, in passing, 3 weeks ago, in the middle of a conversation about structural load, bearing, and green roofing systems. He had remembered. She picked up the chopsticks and said nothing, because there was nothing to say that would not make the moment more or less than it was. But something in her chest, something that had been very carefully sealed, shifted exactly 1 degree. Daniel Hale heard the name for the first time at a rooftop dinner in Tribeca, from a man he had once considered a friend. Reed's bringing her on for the waterfront project. The man said, in the particular tone people use when they are delivering information they know will land badly and are enjoying it slightly. Full creative lead. Apparently he went after her specifically. Daniel set down his whiskey glass with a care that had nothing to do with the glass. "Serena," he said, not a question. "She's been in his building 3-4 times a week for the past month. James, Reed's chief of staff, confirmed the contract is substantial." The man paused. Apparently Reed is personally involved in the design review process, which, as you know, he doesn't do. Daniel knew. He knew because he had spent the better part of 2 years trying to get a meeting with Marcus Reed's investment division, and had been politely, efficiently, and completely stonewalled each time. He knew because Marcus Reed was the kind of man whose attention was itself a form of currency, rare, non-transferable, and extraordinarily difficult to earn. And Serena had it. He picked up his glass again, took a slow sip, looked out at the city below the rooftop, the grid of lights, the organized chaos of 10 million lives moving through the dark. He thought about the conference room, the pen, the sound of her heels on the marble floor as she walked away. He had expected, in the weeks after the divorce, a specific kind of aftermath. He had expected her to call, to reach out through a mutual friend, to do something, anything, that confirmed what he had told himself, that she needed him more than he needed her, that the marriage had been her primary architecture, and without it, she would need to rebuild from nothing. She had not called, she had not reached out. She had, as far as he could determine, simply continued. Quietly, determinedly, as though losing him had been not a devastation but a direction that had not sat well with Daniel Hale. It sat considerably worse now. Serena did not know she was being watched. She would have said, if asked, that she was too busy to be watched, which was true, and also exactly the kind of statement that people make when they are being watched and would prefer not to know. The project consumed her in the best possible way. She was doing the best work of her career and she knew it, the way you know when your body is moving exactly as it was built to move. Every system aligned and firing cleanly. The Thursday dinners had become something she did not analyze too carefully. Marcus was. She searched for the right word and kept landing on the same one, present in a way she had not encountered before in someone with his level of power. Most men like him were architecturally absent even when physically in the room, their attention always fractionally elsewhere on the next thing, the larger thing. Marcus, when he sat across from her, was simply there, fully, with a quality of focus that was sometimes unnerving and was never unwelcome. They talked about the project. They talked about other things. He had strong opinions about cities, what made them livable, what made them human, what most developers got catastrophically wrong. She found herself arguing with him genuinely, which was something she hadn't done in years. Daniel had responded to disagreement with a particular brand of cold dismissal that had trained her, she realized now, to present her ideas with preemptive apology built in. She did not apologize to Marcus Reed. He seemed, if anything, energized by the pushback. He would lean forward slightly, his eyes sharper, and come back at her with a counter, argument that was often better than her original position, and never, not once, made her feel small for having provoked it. One evening, after a particularly extended argument about whether the building's public atrium should prioritize acoustic openness or visual privacy, he sat back in his chair and looked at her with an expression she couldn't immediately read. "You should have been doing this your whole career," he said. "I have been doing this my whole career," she replied. "No." He said it quietly, without accusation. "You've been doing good work inside structures that weren't built for you. That's different." She looked at him across the table. She wanted to deflect. She wanted to make a light comment that moved the conversation sideways. She did neither. "Yes," she said, "it is." The candle between them burned low. Neither of them moved to call for the check. It was Priya who brought her the photograph. Priya had been her assistant for 2 years and had the particular loyalty of someone who had watched their employer go through something difficult and had decided, quietly, to station herself as a kind of personal perimeter. She did this without being asked and without drawing attention to it, which was why Serena trusted her absolutely. Priya appeared in the studio doorway on a Wednesday morning with a tablet in her hand and an expression that was trying to be neutral and not entirely succeeding. "There's something you should see," she said. The photograph had been taken long lens, street level, outside the Japanese restaurant in the West Village. It showed Marcus Reed holding the door open. It showed Serena walking through it. The angle was precise enough to make it look, depending on your willingness to interpret, like something more than 2 people leaving a business dinner. The photograph was on a gossip site with moderate reach but aggressive engagement. The caption read, "Marcus Reed's mystery dinner companion. Sources say she's his new project lead." Others say she's his new project. Serena looked at the photograph for a long moment. She felt something she identified carefully, not embarrassment, not quite anger. Something more like the specific exhaustion of a woman who understands that no matter what she builds, someone will always be more interested in who she's standing next to. "Okay," she said. Priya blinked. "That's it. I'm not going to perform distress for a photograph taken outside a restaurant." She handed the tablet back. "Does it affect the project?" "No. Reed Capital hasn't responded to any press requests. James shut it down in about 40 minutes. Then it doesn't matter." She turned back to her blueprints. But she thought about it. She thought about Marcus seeing it, whether he had seen it, what he had thought. She thought about the caption, his new project, the suggestion beneath the surface that anything she had built, anything she had earned, might be reducible to proximity to a powerful man. She had been here before. She had been Daniel Hale's wife. She knew exactly how quickly a woman's own architecture could be buried under a man's name. She was not going to let that happen again. Not even especially not. For a man she was beginning to find dangerously compelling. Marcus saw the photograph before James could brief him on it. He was in his car, early morning, coffee in hand, when it appeared in a news alert that his phone had, unhelpfully, decided to surface. He looked at it for 3 seconds, then he called James. "Kill it," he said, already moving. James said, "Sight's taking it down in the next hour. No statements, good." He paused. Outside the car window, Manhattan moved in its morning register. Delivery trucks, dog walkers. The city doing what the city does before the performance begins. "Has she seen it?" Marcus asked, almost certainly. Another pause. How did she respond? James's voice had the slight quality of someone choosing words carefully. "Priya says she looked at it for about 30 seconds, said okay, and went back to work." Marcus said nothing for a moment. "All right," he said finally. "Thank you." He ended the call and looked out the window. Okay, just okay. He thought about Serena Hale walking out of that conference room 14 months ago after signing papers that should have broken her. He thought about the way she had sat in his conference room on the first day, not performing confidence, but actually having it, which were two very different things, and he could always tell them apart. He thought about the photograph, himself holding the door, her walking through it. He thought, for the first time, about whether he had been careful enough. Not about the project. The project was above reproach. Everything was above reproach, professionally. He had been rigorous about that, almost aggressively so, because he understood what was at risk if he was not. What he had not been rigorous about was himself. He pressed 2 fingers against his thumb once and looked at the city. He was going to need to be more careful. She brought it up herself that Thursday. They were midway through dinner, a new restaurant, glass and warm wood. The East River visible through the windows like a dark ribbon. They had been talking about the atrium problem, which she had solved in a way that impressed him more than he intended to show, and the conversation had been easy. The way it had become easy between them, comfortable with the specific comfort of 2 people who have stopped performing for each other. Then she set down her fork. "The photograph," she said. He looked at her. "I want to address it directly," she said, "because I think the alternative is that it becomes something that sits underneath our conversations and distorts them, and I'd rather it not." "All right," he said. "My concern isn't the photograph itself. My concern is what it could mean for the project, for how my work on this project is perceived. I've spent a long time building something that is entirely mine, and I need it to stay mine." She held his gaze steadily. "I need the work to be the story." He was quiet for a moment. The restaurant moved around them. "It is the story," he said. "I need you to believe that, not because I'm telling you to believe it, because it's true, and you've earned the right to know that it's true." "I know," she said. "I do know, but I also know how these things work, and I know." She stopped, looked at her water glass, looked back at him. "I know that what is happening between us, outside the professional context, needs to be acknowledged honestly, or we will both pretend it isn't happening, and it will become something we can't manage." The word acknowledged landed on the table between them, like a key placed carefully on a surface. Marcus Reed did not move for a long moment. He was not a man who lost composure. The architecture of his self-possession had been built over decades and stress-tested by things that would have leveled most people. But sitting across from Serena Hale in a glass-walled restaurant, while she looked at him with that precise, unafraid, unperforming directness, he felt something in that architecture shift. "Just slightly, just enough. What," he said quietly, "would acknowledging it honestly look like to you?" She inhaled slowly. "It would look like both of us being honest about the fact that we are not indifferent to each other, and then both of us being honest about what we are and are not ready for." He looked at her for a long time. "I'm not indifferent to you," he said. The words were simple, calibrated, and absolutely true. "I haven't been since the first time I saw you." Something moved through her eyes, not surprise, exactly. More like the specific expression of a person who has known something for a long time, and is finally hearing it confirmed. "I'm not ready," she said, and then, "I don't know when I will be." "I know," he said. "I'm not asking you to be." The silence that followed was not empty. It was full of everything they were not saying, of everything they had just said, of the careful and terrifying business of 2 people being honest with each other in a world that rarely rewards it. After a long moment, she picked up her fork again. He picked up his. Outside, the East River moved in the dark. Daniel Hale made his move on a Friday. It was elegant, as his moves always were, designed to look accidental, impossible to prove as orchestrated, and perfectly aimed. He had a connection on the board of a real estate trust that held partial rights to the waterfront site. The connection was owed a favor. The favor became a question, raised in a board meeting quietly, about whether the project lead had the appropriate scale of experience for a development of this magnitude. Whether her previous projects, while impressive, were in the relevant tier. It was not a torpedo, it was a slow leak. The kind that doesn't sink you immediately, just makes you work harder to stay level while everyone pretends not to notice you listing. Serena found out about it through a source she trusted on a Friday afternoon, and she sat with it in her studio for 20 minutes before she called Priya in. "I need everything we have," she said. "Every project, every square footage, every award, every commendation, every published piece. I need it formatted, and I need it by Monday morning." Priya didn't ask why. "Done," she said. Serena sat back in her chair after Priya left and looked at the ceiling. She knew, not the mechanics of it, not yet, but she knew the shape of it, the particular shape of a door being quietly held shut by a familiar hand. She had felt this before in the years of the marriage, when opportunities had not quite materialized, when rooms had been slightly less open than they should have been, and she had told herself it was the industry, the timing, the natural resistance that ambitious women encounter in ambitious spaces. She understood now that some of it had been Daniel, the man who had said on their third date that he loved her strength, and had spent 3 years systematically, quietly, with plausible deniability at every step, trying to make her smaller. She felt something move through her that was not quite anger. It was colder than anger, clearer. She was not going to be small. She picked up her phone. She did not call Marcus. She called her lawyer. The meeting with her lawyer lasted 2 hours. Elena Marsh was 61 years old, had the energy of someone half that age, and had built her practice on a specific and valuable specialty, protecting people who had been quietly, professionally, undermined by people with more structural power than conscience. She had seen this pattern so many times that she could identify it the way a doctor identifies a fracture from a single X-ray, the angle, the clean line, the precise location of the break. She listened to Serena without interrupting. When Serena finished, Elena set down her pen and looked at her across the desk with an expression that was not quite sympathy. It was something more useful than sympathy. "You know who it is," Elena said. "I know the shape of it." Serena said, "I don't have the mechanism yet. We'll get the mechanism." Elena opened a folder. "In the meantime, you document everything. Every conversation, every timeline, every professional endorsement you have received in the last 3 years. We build the counterargument before anyone has formally made the argument. That's what I'm already doing." Elena smiled, brief, precise. "Good. One more thing." She paused. "Your connection to Marcus Reed, the project, the photograph." Serena held her gaze. "What about it?" "If this escalates, and these things tend to escalate, someone is going to try to use it. They're going to suggest that the contract was not merit-based, that it was." Elena chose her word carefully. "Personal." The word sat in the air between them. "I know." Serena said quietly. "Does Reed know what's happening?" A pause. "Not yet." Elena looked at her for a moment. "He needs to know. Not because you need him to fight your battles, clearly you don't, but because he is a party to this project and he deserves the information." Serena nodded once. It was the nod of someone who has already arrived at the same conclusion and does not particularly enjoy it. She told him on a Tuesday, not at a restaurant, not over dinner. She called James and asked for 30 minutes in the office, professional context, no agenda sent in advance. She arrived at Reed Capital at 10 in the morning and rode the elevator to the 42nd floor with a folder under her arm and the specific composure of a woman who has decided that the only currency worth spending is the truth. Marcus was at his desk when she entered. He looked up, read something in her face immediately. She watched him do it. watched his attention shift register from professional to something more alert, and stood. "Sit down," she said, because she needed to be the one to set the frame. "Please." He sat. She sat across from him. She opened the folder, but she didn't look at it. She told him everything, the board connection, the question raised, the pattern she recognized, the call to her lawyer, the documentation she was building. She told it cleanly, without drama, in the same precise language she used to describe structural specifications. He listened without interrupting. When she finished, the office was very quiet. Marcus was looking at a point just past her shoulder, not unfocused, the opposite of unfocused. He had the quality, when he was processing something important, of a stillness so complete it was almost physical. She had noticed this before. She let the silence stand. Then he looked at her. "How long have you known?" he asked. "Friday, you called your lawyer before you called me." "Yes," she met his eyes. "Because it's my problem and my career and my fight. I'm telling you now because you are a stakeholder in the project and you deserve to know. And because," she stopped for one beat, "because I've decided to trust you, which is not something I do quickly or lightly." Something moved through his expression. Not gratitude, deeper than gratitude. Something that looked almost like pain briefly, as though her trust was a thing he felt the full weight of. "Who?" he said, quietly, almost gently. "I don't have confirmation." "Who?" he said again. She looked at him for a moment. "Daniel." The name landed. Marcus did not react the way she half expected. No outward display. No change of expression that she could read easily. He simply absorbed it, the way he seemed to absorb most things, and was quiet for several seconds. When he spoke, his voice was level and entirely controlled, and somehow, because of that control, more frightening than anger would have been. "I'll handle it," he said. "No," she said immediately. "You won't." He looked at her. "I mean it." She leaned forward slightly. "If you step in and handle it, then the narrative becomes exactly what he wants it to be. The woman who needed the powerful man to defend her, the contract that was personal. My work disappears into your intervention, and I spend the next decade explaining myself." She held his gaze. "I handle this my way. I need you to trust me the way I'm trusting you." The silence that followed was loaded. He looked at her for a long moment, and she could see it, the effort it cost him. The specific restraint of a man who is accustomed to solving problems immediately and efficiently, and who is being asked, very directly, not to. "All right," he said finally. "Thank you, but," he said, and his voice had an edge now, quiet and absolute. "If it escalates beyond a professional challenge, if it becomes personal, if it becomes threatening in any way, I will not stand aside. That is not negotiable." She looked at him across the desk, at the controlled intensity of him, at the thing underneath the control that she was learning, slowly, to read. "That," she said quietly, "is acceptable." What neither of them knew, what Serena's lawyer would not discover until the following week, was that Daniel's move had not been entirely his own. He had a partner. Her name was Claudia Voss, and she was Serena's older sister. The Voss family had money, old money, the kind that sits quietly in the background of a person's life, and shapes it in ways that are easier to ignore than examine. Serena had always been the quieter daughter, the one who built things. Claudia had always been the louder one, more social, more strategic, more attuned to the architecture of family loyalty and what it could be leveraged into. Serena had not spoken to Claudia in 8 months. The last conversation had been in January, 3 months after the divorce, when Claudia had called and said, in the particular tone she used when she was saying something she had rehearsed, that perhaps Serena needed to consider whether she had been the problem in the marriage, whether her ambition had made Daniel feel unnecessary, whether a woman who insisted on building her own career quite so aggressively could expect a man to feel secure beside her. Serena had said, "I need you to not say anything else." Claudia had said more things. Serena had ended the call. She had not, she realized now with a slow and terrible clarity, connected those dots. She had not asked herself why Claudia, who had been Daniel's ally long before the divorce, who had introduced them at a dinner party 6 years ago and had positioned herself as the architect of their relationship, as though she had built it and could therefore claim partial ownership, had remained in Daniel's orbit after the separation. She had not asked, because the answer was the kind of thing you protect yourself from knowing until you can't anymore. Elena called her on a Wednesday with the mechanism, the board member who raised the question. Elena said without preamble, "His name is George Sattler. He plays golf weekly, same club with Daniel Hale. That's the direct line." A pause. "But Sattler also has a social connection to a Claudia Voss. The three of them attended the same benefit dinner in September." Serena sat down. She sat down because her legs made the decision before her mind caught up. "Serena," Elena said carefully. "I heard you. Do you want to take a moment?" "No." She pressed her fingertips to the edge of her desk and breathed once, slowly, through her nose. "No, tell me the rest." Elena told her the rest. It was not much more, not yet, but it was enough to establish the triangle. Claudia had introduced Sattler to Daniel at the September dinner. Sattler had raised the question at the board meeting the following month. The timing was exact, the connection was clean. Her sister had sat across from her at family dinners for 34 years. Had been in the room when she graduated, when she got her first commission, when she married Daniel, when she had come home after the divorce with her composure intact, and her eyes very dry, and her mother had said, "You'll be all right, you're always all right," and Claudia had hugged her and said nothing. Her sister had been working against her, possibly for months, possibly longer. She sat with that for a long time after she ended the call. She sat in her studio with the blueprint spread across the table, and the afternoon light moving across the floor, and the sounds of the city coming through the glass, and she let herself feel the full weight of it, the specific, irreducible pain of betrayal by someone who has had access to your softest places. She did not cry, not yet. She thought about Claudia. She thought about Daniel. She thought about the September dinner, the introduction, the precise choreography of it. Her sister and her ex-husband in a room together, deciding or beginning to decide that the thing to do with Serena Hale was to quietly ensure she stayed small. She thought about the pen on the marble table, the sound of the papers being pushed back across. She thought about the Japanese restaurant, the bag of takeout, the man who had remembered her order 3 weeks later, as though it were a thing worth remembering. She stood up. She went to her drafting table, and she worked for 4 hours straight, the best 4 hours she had produced in a week. The designs coming clear and precise and entirely hers. Every line a declaration, every structural choice a statement, and she thought, no, not this time, not again. She did not tell Marcus about Claudia, not immediately. She needed to hold it for a few days to process it alone, which was how she processed the things that hurt most. She had learned early that certain wounds, if exposed too soon, became something other than wounds. They became performances of pain. She refused to perform her pain for anyone, but he knew something had shifted. He knew it the following Thursday when she arrived at the restaurant and sat down and was quieter than usual, not cold, not absent, but carrying something. The way a person carries something heavy by walking very carefully. He ordered for both of them. He had started doing this, having paid close enough attention to know her preferences. And when the food arrived, he said nothing about what he'd noticed. He talked about the project. She talked about the project. They ate, and the conversation moved the way it always moved between them. With that particular ease, she had stopped pretending she didn't value. But midway through the meal, he put down his fork. He looked at her. "Whatever it is," he said quietly, "you don't have to tell me tonight. You don't have to tell me at all, but I want you to know that I see it." She looked at him across the table, at the directness of him, at the way he made space for her to be exactly wherever she was without requiring her to perform any different version of it. "It involves my sister," she said. He held very still. "She's been working with Daniel." The words were flat. She had made them flat deliberately. She needed them flat. needed the emotion held at a distance until she was ready for it. I don't know how long. My lawyer found the connection this week. A silence. I'm sorry, he said. And it was not a social reflex, it was real. And she felt it land as real. And that landing was almost the most dangerous thing of all. I haven't decided what to do about it yet, she said. You don't have to decide tonight, he said. She looked down at her plate, looked up again. The thing about betrayal, she said slowly, is that it doesn't just change what happened. It changes what you thought you knew about everything that came before. Every memory gets relit. You look back and you see the shadows differently. He was very quiet. Yes, he said, and there was something in the word a weight, a recognition that made her look at him more carefully. You know this, she said. It was not a question. He met her eyes, yes, she waited. He looked at her for a long moment with an expression she had not seen on his face before. Something open, something unguarded, something that cost him something to allow. My engagement, he said, 6 years ago. He paused. She was in business with my CFO. Had been for 2 years before I found out. Another pause. It was not a simple situation. The restaurant moved around them, glasses, voices, the low warm noise of other people's evenings. What happened, she asked. I walked away from both of them, he said, rebuilt the company's financial structure in 18 months. His voice was level. I was very good at the professional recovery. And the personal one, she said softly. He was quiet for a long time. I'm still working on it, he said. The candle between them had burned almost to nothing. Neither of them moved to call for the check. Outside, the city moved in its endless, indifferent way. And inside the small, warm light of the restaurant, 2 people sat with their separate scars in the open air between them. And the air held them. The documentation Serena submitted to the board was 47 pages long. It was, Elena said when she reviewed it, one of the most comprehensive professional portfolios she had seen in 20 years of practice. Not because it was padded or performative, because it was precise. Every project listed with full specifications, square footage, budget scale, completion timeline, and independent verification. Awards and commendations sourced and dated. Published architectural criticism, peer reviews, industry citations. Letters from clients that read not like endorsements but like testimony. Specific, detailed. The language of people describing something that had genuinely changed the spaces they lived and worked in. Serena had built it in 4 days. She had not slept much in those 4 days. She had worked from her studio and from her kitchen table and from a corner booth in a coffee shop 3 blocks from her apartment, and she had eaten poorly and forgotten to water the plant on her windowsill and had worn the same gray cashmere sweater for approximately 60 hours. And she had not cared about any of these things because she was building something, and when she was built, something the rest of the world reduced to background noise. This was, she understood now, exactly what Daniel had resented. Not her ambition in the abstract, the way people claim to admire ambition in women while finding it, in practice, unnerving. He had resented specifically this. The completeness of her focus when she was doing what she was built to do. The way she became in those periods entirely self-sufficient, entirely whole without him. She had thought in the early years of the marriage that she needed to manage this quality in herself, to make it smaller, softer, less visible. She had thought this was what love required, the careful negotiation of your own wholeness to make room for someone else's comfort. She understood now that she had been managing the wrong thing entirely. The board reviewed the portfolio on a Thursday morning. Serena was not present. This was deliberate, Elena's advice and correct. You do not stand in the room while people examine the evidence of your value. You let the work stand without you, because the work that requires the author present to defend it is not yet strong enough to stand alone. Her work was strong enough. George Sattler was present. Sattler was 53, a careful man with the practiced neutrality of someone who had spent a career making consequential decisions while appearing to make reasonable ones. He had raised his question at the previous meeting with the smooth assurance of someone who expected it to land softly and create a tide he could quietly steer. He had not expected 47 pages of counterweight. He reviewed the portfolio with the others. He said very little. At the end of the meeting, the board chair, a woman named Patricia who had built 3 companies and had no patience for political noise and professional processes, summarized the discussion with brisk efficiency. The portfolio speaks for itself. Patricia said, "The question of experience has been answered. We move forward." It was not a victory, exactly. It was a restoration. The baseline that should have existed all along, restored to where it belonged. But Serena, sitting in her studio when Alina called with the summary, felt something release in her chest that she had not entirely known was clenched. "Thank you," she said to Alina. "Don't thank me." Alina said, "I submitted the document. You built the 47 years of career that filled it. What happened next, nobody planned." Marcus found out about Claudia not from Serena, but from James, who had assembled a fuller picture of the situation through the kind of quiet, thorough inquiry that James was extraordinarily good at and never drew attention to. James presented his findings on a Friday morning with his characteristic economy: a single printed page, 3 bullet points, the names and dates arranged with the clean logic of a timeline that told its own story without editorializing. Marcus read it once, set it down, picked it up, and read it again. Then he sat very still for approximately 90 seconds. James waited, her sister. Marcus said, "Yes," another silence. "How long has she known?" "Approximately 10 days. Her lawyer found the connection first." Marcus looked out the window. The November sky was the color of pewter, flat and cold, the city below it doing its relentless work. "She didn't tell me immediately," he said. It was not an accusation. It was the sound of a man noting a fact and understanding it. "No," James said. He understood it because he knew her. He understood that she had needed to hold it alone first, to process it in the private space she kept carefully protected, the space she allowed no one in to until she had done the work of surviving the thing herself. He understood this because he recognized it. He had done the same thing for years, after the engagement, after the CFO, after the careful and devastating unraveling of his trust in 2 people he had believed were permanent. He had rebuilt in private and presented the world with the finished structure. She was doing the same thing. He loved that about her. The word arrived in his mind with no preamble, no ceremony, no warning. He looked at it. He did not look away. He called her that evening, not James, him. His own phone, his own voice, the particular slight awkwardness of a man who is more comfortable with in-person conversation and knows it. She picked up on the 3rd ring. "James briefed me," he said. "No preamble about your sister." A beat of silence. "I was going to tell you," she said. "I know." He paused. "I'm not calling because I'm—" He stopped. Started again. "I'm not checking on the project. I'm calling because I wanted to hear your voice and know you were all right." The silence that followed was one of those silences. He heard her breathe, once slowly. "I'm all right," she said. "Are you?" Another pause, longer. "I'm processing it. The professional piece is manageable. The other piece is—" She stopped. "She's my sister. She sat across from me at Christmas. She was there when my mother was sick last year. She—" A pause that was different from the others, shorter, tighter. "She knows things about me that nobody else knows, and she used her access to me to help him." He said nothing. He let it stand. "I keep trying to understand why," Serena said. "And I can come up with reasons. She was always closer to my parents' idea of what the family should look like, the marriage, the social position, the right kind of life. I think Daniel represented something to her, something she didn't want to lose, and I think losing him—" Another pause. "I think she decided I was the reason something was taken from her." "That's not," he began. "I know it's not rational. People in pain don't require rational reasons." Her voice was very steady, and the steadiness of it was the most heartbreaking thing he had heard in a long time. I thought she loved me. I thought that was the floor, the thing you could stand on even when everything else was uncertain, and finding out it wasn't." She stopped. He held the phone and did not speak, because there was nothing to say that would be more useful than silence. He let her have the silence. He held the other end of it like a hand held out in the dark, not pulling, not directing, just present. After a moment, she said quietly, "Thank you for calling, Serena." He said, "Yes, you are not." He paused. Chose the words carefully, the way he chose everything, with full attention and no waste. "You are not a woman who is defined by who has failed to see her clearly. You understand that?" The silence that followed was so complete he could hear the city through her window, faint, distant, the endless hum of 10 million lives. "I'm learning it," she said again. "I know," he said, "me too." She met Claudia for coffee on a Tuesday in November. She had arranged it herself, called her sister directly, the first call in 8 months, and said simply that she wanted to meet. Claudia had agreed with a speed that suggested either guilt or strategy, and Serena had spent the drive to the coffee shop, identifying which one she thought it was and arriving, finally, at probably both. The place was neutral, a small cafe in Chelsea that neither of them had particular associations with, chosen deliberately. Claudia was already there when Serena arrived, sitting with her coat still on, and her hands wrapped around a cup she wasn't drinking, and she looked. Serena noted this with the part of her brain that was always observing, frightened, not performing frightened, actually frightened. Serena sat down. She ordered a coffee. She waited for it to arrive. She took one sip, then she looked at her sister. "I know about George Sadler," she said. "I know about the September dinner. I know about Daniel." Claudia's jaw tightened. Her eyes did not drop. She was, whatever else she was, not a woman who looked away when cornered. "How much do you know?" Claudia said. "Enough." A silence. "I didn't think it would," Claudia began. "Don't," Serena said, quietly, not harshly. "Just absolutely. Don't tell me you didn't think it would go as far as it went. Don't tell me about your intentions. Tell me why." Claudia looked at her. For a long moment, a moment in which the coffee shop moved around them, a barista called someone's name. A door opened and closed and let in a breath of November cold. Claudia was silent. "He called me after the divorce," she said finally. Her voice was different now, smaller. He seemed destroyed. "I know you don't believe that, but he seemed genuinely." "I don't care how he seemed," Serena said. "I care why you chose his pain over my future." The words landed. Claudia flinched. It was small, a tightening around the eyes, a barely perceptible pull at the mouth, but it was real, and Serena saw it, and felt nothing triumphant about it. "I was angry at you," Claudia said, and now her voice had changed again, stripped of the strategy, arriving at something rawer and less prepared. "I know I know it doesn't justify anything, but I was angry at you for a long time, and I hadn't told you, because I didn't have the right words, and then Daniel called and he was angry too, and she stopped. It was easier to be angry together." "What were you angry about?" Serena asked. Claudia looked at her across the small table. Her eyes were bright. Not quite tears, not yet. "You always made it look so easy," she said. "Everything you built, every time you walked into a room, the way you are, the way you've always been, like you don't need anyone's approval to know your own worth. And I have spent my entire life," her voice cracked once, briefly, and she pressed her lips together. "I have spent my entire life performing the life that I thought would make me feel that way. And it doesn't, and watching you," she stopped. The cafe moved around them. The barista called another name. A couple near the window laughed at something on a phone. "You resented me," Serena said, "for being something you wanted to be." Yes. The word was barely audible. Serena looked at her sister, looked at the tightness around her eyes, the defensive set of her shoulders, the small, frightened woman underneath the composed exterior. Looked at her and felt not forgiveness, not yet. Forgiveness was a building, and she had barely begun the foundation, but something. Something human and complicated and true. What you did, Serena said quietly, was a betrayal. I need you to understand that fully before anything else. What you did with Daniel, the dinner, Sadler, the board, that was a deliberate act against my professional life and against me. I need you to say that you know that. A long pause. "I know that," Claudia said. "And the reasons, your anger, your pain, whatever Daniel told you, those are explanations. They are not absolution. I know." Serena looked at her for a long moment. "I'm not ready to forgive you," she said. I don't know when I will be, but I needed you to know that I know, and I needed to hear it from you directly, because I refused to carry around the weight of a half-known thing for years. She paused. I've done that once already. I'm not doing it again. She finished her coffee. She put on her coat. She stood and she looked at her sister one more time at the tears that had finally arrived, quiet and unperformed, tracing a slow line down Claudia's cheek. And she felt the full, complicated weight of a lifetime of love and damage, and the irreducible fact that blood was blood and wounds were wounds, and neither of those things canceled the other out. I'll call you, Serena said, when I'm ready. She walked out into the November cold. She stood on the sidewalk, and the city moved around her, and the air was sharp and clean on her face. She stood there for exactly 1 minute. She counted deliberately, feeling each second, and then she began walking. She did not cry on the sidewalk. She was saving it. She just didn't know that yet. She cried that night. Not at first. First she went back to the studio and worked for 2 hours, reviewing the latest design phase, and the work was good, and she let the goodness of it hold her. Then she went home, to her apartment that she had chosen herself and furnished herself and made herself, the apartment that contained no trace of Daniel Hale or anyone else, the apartment that was entirely and completely hers. She made tea. She sat on the window seat with the city spread below her and her hands wrapped around the mug, and the steam rising in the dark. And then, quietly, without drama, she cried. She cried for the marriage she had believed in. She cried for the version of Daniel she had thought she knew, the man at the altar, the man in the rain outside a restaurant on their second date, who had held an umbrella over her head and forgotten to hold it over his own. She cried for the sister she had grown up beside, the girl who had held her hand at their grandmother's funeral, the woman who had chosen anger over love and had caused real damage and was going to have to live with that. She cried for herself, for the 3 years of quiet erosion, for the things she had made smaller in herself to make room for someone who was making himself smaller too, in different ways, and blaming her for the claustrophobia. She cried for a long time. When she was done, she sat in the quiet and felt clean. The specific cleanness of something fully felt, fully moved through, fully released into the air where it could disperse. She picked up her phone. She looked at Marcus's name in her contacts. She did not call him. It was late, and what she had just moved through was hers. It needed to be hers completely before she could share any part of it with anyone. But she looked at his name for a long moment. Then she set the phone down and finished her tea and went to bed. She slept for the first time in weeks without waking. Daniel Hale made his second mistake on a Monday. The first mistake, the board, the question, the quiet orchestration of professional doubt, had been calculated and contained and had failed cleanly, the way a surgical strike fails when the target turns out to be more fortified than the intelligence suggested. He had underestimated her documentation. He had underestimated Elena Marsh. He had most fundamentally underestimated the 47 years of work that Serena had built with her own hands and her own mind, brick by careful brick, and which had turned out to be considerably more substantial than his interference. The second mistake was different in nature. It was emotional. And emotional mistakes, in Daniel Hale's experience, were the ones that cost you. He called Marcus Reid directly. Not through an intermediary, not through a lawyer, not through the careful architecture of plausible deniability that had characterized every move he'd made since the divorce. He called the main line of Reid Capital on a Monday morning and identified himself and asked to be put through. And because his name still opened certain doors, not as many as it once had, and fewer every month, a fact he was aware of with the specific dull ache of a man watching his own relevance diminish, he was put through. Marcus picked up on the second ring. Hale, he said. Nothing else. Reid. Daniel paused, the pause of a man who has rehearsed this and is discovering that the rehearsal and the reality have very different acoustics. I think we should meet. I don't, Marcus said. The directness of it was, Daniel recognized, deliberate. Marcus Reid did not stumble into directness. He deployed it precisely where he wanted it to land. This is a professional matter. Daniel said, no. Marcus said, it isn't. A silence. She's building something with you, Daniel said. His voice had shifted, still controlled, but something underneath the control had moved, like a fault line adjusting. I want you to understand what you're working with. I know exactly what I'm working with, Marcus said, and the quiet in his voice was the kind of quiet that precedes very large things. I know the quality of her work. I know the scale of her ability. I know. A pause, brief and deliberate. I know considerably more about her than you appear to have known during 3 years of marriage. The silence that followed was absolute. Daniel said nothing. Don't call this number again, Marcus said, and ended the call. James appeared in the office doorway 12 minutes later with the expression he wore when something required immediate attention, and he was deciding how to frame it. Hale called, Marcus said without looking up from his desk. I know. I'm sorry, he came through the main line before. It's fine. Marcus set down his pen. Looked at the window. The November sky was doing what November skies do, pressing down, gray and absolute. The kind of sky that makes everything feel slightly more consequential than it is. He's going to escalate, probably, James said. He's not rational about her anymore. He was never rational about her, he just had rational, looking mechanisms for managing it. Now the mechanisms have failed and Marcus paused. He's running out of moves and he knows it. James was quiet for a moment. What do you want to do? Marcus looked at his hands on the desk. The question moved through him in layers, professional, practical, and underneath those, something else. Something that had been building for months with the particular unstoppable momentum of a thing that has been suppressed too long. Nothing yet, he said, but I need to see her today. James nodded once and disappeared. He arrived at her studio at noon. He had not called ahead, or rather, James had called Priya, who had apparently said send him up with a speed that suggested she had been waiting for this particular development for some time, and had opinions about it. The studio was on the 4th floor of a building in the meatpacking district. Exposed brick, high ceilings, enormous north, facing windows that filled the space with the flat silver light that architects and artists prize. It smelled of coffee and paper and something faintly cedar, and the walls were covered with the organized chaos of an active creative mind, pinned drawings, material samples, photographs of structures, handwritten notes in her precise small script. She was standing at the drafting table when he entered, one hand on the surface, leaning over a drawing, and she looked up with a slightly arrested expression of someone pulled from very deep concentration. She took in his presence, read something in his face. What happened? She said, not a question. Daniel called me this morning. She straightened slowly, set down her pencil. The studio was quiet around them. Priya had apparently decided that whatever was happening required privacy, because the outer room was empty. What did he say? Serena said. He wanted to meet. He wanted to. Marcus paused, choosing words. He characterized it as wanting me to understand what I was working with regarding you. Her eyes were very steady. And what did you say? I told him I knew exactly what I was working with. He looked at her directly. And I ended the call. She absorbed this. Her expression did not change dramatically, but something moved through it briefly. Something that was not quite emotion, but was the shadow of emotion, the shape of something felt. He's going to do something else, she said. Ending the call won't, I know. He took a step further into the studio. He was aware, as he always was in her space, of the particular intimacy of being among someone's work. The unguarded version of a person that exists in what they make when nobody is watching. Serena, I need to say something to you. She waited. He had thought about this on the drive over. He had thought about the precise words, the architecture of them, the way he wanted to build the sentence so it was strong enough to hold what it needed to hold. And now, standing in her studio in the flat November light, with her standing across from him in that way she had of being entirely present and entirely herself, he found that all the architecture fell away. I have been trying, he said, to be appropriate, to be professional, to give you the space you need and to not. He stopped. To not be another man who makes your professional life and your personal life the same complicated territory. She said nothing. She was very still, and I believe in those intentions. I believe they are right. He looked at her. But I also know that what I feel for you is not something I'm able to categorize as professional. I haven't been able to for a long time, and Daniel calling this morning and speaking about you as though you were a variable in someone else's equation. Something moved in his jaw, a tightening, brief and visible. I find that I am not interested in being careful about this anymore. The studio was absolutely quiet. Outside, a truck moved through the street below. A pigeon landed on the window ledge and regarded them briefly and departed. Marcus, she said. Her voice was careful. Not cold careful. The way she was careful with things that mattered. I'm not asking you for anything, he said. This is not a declaration that requires a response. I just needed you to know, without the professional framing, without the appropriate distance. He held her gaze. I am not indifferent to you. I told you that months ago. What I didn't tell you is that I haven't been indifferent to you since the first night I saw you, and that I have thought about who you are, about the specific quality of your mind and your courage and your refusal to be diminished every day since then. Serena looked at him. She looked at him for a long time in the flat silver light of her studio, among her drawings and her materials and the carefully built evidence of everything she had made and was making, and she felt the word arrived without her permission. Safe, not safe in the way that meant protected, safe in the way that meant seen. Safe in the way that meant, here is a person who is looking at the real version of you and is not frightened by it, and is not threatened by it, and is not interested in making it smaller. She had waited her entire adult life for that particular safety. She was terrified of it. I'm scared, she said. Quietly, plainly, with no performance, just the fact, I know, he said. The last time I trusted someone completely, I know. I don't think I can survive another. She stopped. Her voice, which had been so steady for so long, had found its edge. She pressed her lips together briefly. I built myself back from that. It took everything I had, and I'm not the same person I was before it. Some of what I lost I don't think I can. She stopped again. He crossed the studio. He did not reach for her. He stopped close enough that she could feel the warmth of him. Close enough that the air between them was no longer neutral, and he looked at her with an expression that was fully and completely unguarded in a way she had never seen on his face before. All of it, everything he kept controlled and managed and presented to the world as composure, was simply, entirely absent. What was left was the man underneath, the man who had rebuilt his own company from the wreckage of someone else's betrayal. The man who touched his thumb to his second finger when he was thinking. The man who had remembered her food order 3 weeks later and had not made a gesture of it. I'm scared too, he said. She looked at him, at the truth of it on his face. You don't look scared, she said. I am exceptionally good, he said quietly, at not looking how I feel. Something broke open in her chest. Slowly, like a window being opened in a room that has been sealed for too long. Not a shattering, a releasing. The cold, clean air coming in, the sealed, stale warmth going out. She reached up. She put her hand against his jaw, just her hand, just the warmth of her palm against his face, and she felt him go completely still beneath her touch, the way something goes still when it finally stops bracing for impact. He closed his eyes, just for a moment, just long enough. When he opened them, she was looking at him, and there were tears on her face. The one time, the only time, the tears she had been saving for months without knowing it. Silent, unhurried, entirely real, he lifted his hand and with 2 fingers, gently, impossibly gently, he caught one of them. He didn't say anything. Neither did she. They stood in the silver light of her studio while the city moved below them, and the November sky pressed down, and the drawings on the walls bore witness, and in the silence between them was everything, the months of careful distance, the professional armor, the separate scars, the fear, the trust being built brick by careful brick, all of it present and held and real. After a long time, she let her hand fall. She stepped back once. She wiped her face with the back of her wrist, with the small practical efficiency of a woman returning from somewhere very deep. I need more time, she said. I know, he said. I'm not saying no. I know that too. She looked at him. How are you so patient? He considered this, actually considered it. the way he considered everything worth thinking about. Because, he said finally, what I am waiting for is worth waiting for. I've spent a long time moving too fast toward the wrong things. I'm not interested in making that mistake again. She held his gaze for one more long, steady moment. Then she picked up her pencil. She looked back at her drawing. Stay, she said. I'll make coffee. We can look at the atrium plans. He took off his coat. He hung it on the hook beside the door, the hook she had never told him about, that he had simply noticed the first time he visited, and had used ever since as though it had always been his. He sat down at the long table. She made the coffee, and in the particular quiet of two people who have just survived something true together, they worked. Daniel's second move arrived the next morning. It arrived not through a board member or a business connection, or any of the careful mechanisms he had previously employed. It arrived as a story, 3 paragraphs, no byline, published on a financial gossip site with enough reach to matter, suggesting that the Reed waterfront project had been awarded not through a competitive process, but through a personal relationship between Marcus Reed and his project lead, and that questions were being raised about the integrity of the selection process. 3 paragraphs, no evidence, all implication. Serena read it at 7 in the morning at her kitchen table, with her coffee going cold beside her. She read it once, set her phone down, picked it up, and read it again. Then she called Elena. I've seen it, Elena said without greeting. He's gone public, Serena said. Her voice was flat, controlled. Underneath the control was something she was managing very carefully. A cold, bright anger that was cleaner and more focused than anything she had felt in months. It's defamatory, Elena said. It's also deliberately structured to be difficult to prove as defamatory. No direct accusations, all insinuation. Classic. Can we respond? We can, and we will. I'm drafting a formal statement now. I also need you to prepare a timeline of the entire selection process, every documented communication, every submission, every evaluation. We demonstrate the integrity of the process with facts, not with emotion. I have all of it, Serena said. I've had all of it since the beginning. Of course you have, Elena said, and there was in her voice the particular warmth of a woman who has backed the right person and is watching them prove it. Elena, Serena paused. He's not going to stop. No. Elena agreed. He's not. Not until there's a cost he can't absorb. A pause. Let me make the cost. Marcus called at 7:45. She picked up before the second ring. I've seen it, she said. I know. His voice was controlled in a way she recognized now. The very particular control of a man managing something large and not entirely successfully. Serena, I need to. Elena is handling it. She said, legally. The process documentation is already being compiled. We respond with facts. A pause. I need you to not do anything. A silence on his end. He has gone after your reputation. Marcus said. His voice was very quiet. He has gone after the integrity of this project, and by extension the integrity of my company, and he has done it publicly and without evidence, and I am, he stopped. She heard him breathe. I am, he said, more quietly, not in a good place regarding my own restraint this morning. Something moved through her at that. At the rawness of it, at the admission, Marcus, she kept her voice steady. Listen to me. He wants a reaction. He wants you to move loudly, visibly, in a way that confirms the narrative. A powerful man defending a woman. That's the story he wants written. A long pause. I know, he said. The words came out with effort. Let me write the story, she said. Let me write it the way it should be written, with the work, with the facts, with the timeline of every single professional interaction, documented and verified. Her voice was steady and certain and absolutely clear. Let my work answer this. That is the only answer worth giving. The silence that followed was long. Then, all right, 2 words, every ounce of his self-control compressed into 2 words. Thank you, she said. Serena. His voice had shifted, the professional control still there, but underneath it something open, the same openness she had seen in the studio yesterday, the same unguarded quality that still startled. Her every time she encountered it. "I know," she said softly. She did know. She ended the call. She sat at her kitchen table in the early morning light with her cold coffee and her phone and the quiet of her apartment around her. She looked at the city through the window, gray and vast and absolutely indifferent to the small dramas of individual lives, and she thought, no, not this time. She was going to walk into this building with her documentation and her 47 years of work and her precise, unshakable knowledge of her own value. She was going to let Alina make the legal case. She was going to let the work stand in the light. And then she was going to go to dinner with Marcus Reed, not as a project lead, not as a professional contact, not as two people being careful, just as herself. Just as a woman who had been through the particular fire that refines rather than destroys, and who had come out the other side knowing exactly what she was made of. She stood up, she poured the cold coffee down the sink, she made a fresh cup, she opened her laptop. She began to write. The formal response went out on a Thursday. Alina had crafted it with the precision of a surgeon and the patience of someone who understood that the most devastating rebuttals are the ones that do not raise their voice. It was 2 pages. It contained the complete timeline of the project selection process, every submission date, every evaluation criterion, every documented communication between Serena's firm and Raid Capital, beginning 8 months before the waterfront contract was awarded and proceeding in unbroken chronological order to the present. It contained independent verification from the 3 other firms that had been considered for the project, 2 of whom had voluntarily provided statements confirming the rigorous and competitive nature of the process. It contained a letter from Patricia, the board chair, written in the dry and authoritative language of someone who has been building things for 30 years and has no patience for people. Mistake noise for substance. It did not mention Daniel Hale by name. It did not need to. Alina sent it to the same financial site that had published the original 3 paragraphs. The site published the response in full within 4 hours because it was airtight, because refusing to publish it would have exposed them to considerably more risk than publishing it, and because the facts were simply, cleanly, irrefutably the facts. By evening the story had shifted. Not dramatically. These things never shift dramatically in the moment. They shift the way tides shift, gradually, the water moving in a different direction while the surface still looks the same. But the shift was real, and it was permanent, and everyone in the relevant rooms could feel it. Serena was in her studio when Alina called with the confirmation. "It's done," Alina said. Serena set down her pencil, looked at the drawing in front of her at the atrium, finally resolved. The design she had been fighting toward for months, the balance of acoustic openness and visual privacy, achieved in a way that felt when she looked at it like the best thing she had ever made. "Thank you," she said. "Don't thank me," Elena said for the 2nd time. "I keep telling you, the work did this. The work always does this when it's good enough. Your job was to make it good enough. You did that part a long time ago." After she ended the call, she sat quietly in the studio for a few minutes. The afternoon light was doing something beautiful through the north, facing windows. The low winter sun hitting the glass at an angle that turned the whole room gold, briefly. The way rooms are sometimes gold for exactly 1 minute before the light shifts and it's gone. She sat in the gold light and breathed. She thought about the conference room, the pen, the papers pushed back across the marble. She thought about 14 months of building, not just the project, not just the professional armor, but herself. The version of herself that existed on the other side of all of it, quieter in some ways, more certain in others, less interested in being understood by people who were not worth the effort of explaining herself to. She thought about Marcus. She picked up her phone. She typed, "It's done. Alina says the tide has turned. I'm in the studio. Come when you're ready." She set the phone down. She went back to work. He arrived 40 minutes later. He had clearly come directly from a meeting, still in his suit, no coat, which meant he had left Reed Capital without stopping for it, which meant he had left the moment he got her message, which was a thing she filed away quietly and completely. He came through the studio door and stopped. He looked at her. She looked at him, and then, without any of the professional scaffolding, without the careful distance, without the months of appropriate restraint, she crossed the studio and walked directly into him, her arms around his chest, her face against his shoulder, and she felt his arms come around her immediately, completely, with the particular sureness of someone who has been waiting to do exactly this for a very long time and is not wasting a single second of it now that the moment has arrived. He held her. Not gently, firmly, fully. The way you hold something you are not willing to drop. One hand at her back, one at the back of her head, and she felt the tension of months, the careful distance, the professional framing, the fear, the grief, the anger, the long, exhausting work of surviving and rebuilding leave her body in one slow exhale against his shoulder. He pressed his lips to the top of her head once. Neither of them spoke. The studio was gold around them, the winter light doing its brief, beautiful work, the drawings on the walls bearing witness to everything she had built and was still building. Outside, the city moved in its indifferent way. Inside, in the warmth and quiet, two people who had been through separate fires stood in the wreckage and the gold light and simply held each other. After a long time, she pulled back enough to look at him. His face was, she searched for the word and arrived at the same one she always arrived at with him, present. Entirely, completely present. No composure, no management, no careful calibration. Just him, looking at her with everything visible. "Hi," she said. Something happened to his face, the rarest thing she had seen in all the months of knowing him. His mouth curved, not a performance, not a social reflex. A real smile, slow and private, the smile of a man who has forgotten for a moment to be careful. "Hi," he said. They stayed in the studio until the light was gone. She showed him the atrium design, the final resolution, the thing she had been fighting toward. He studied it with the focused attention he brought to everything, and then he looked up at her with an expression that held genuine admiration and something else, something softer, something that had nothing to do with the building. "This is extraordinary," he said. "I know," she said, and then, because she could, because she had earned it, because this was who she was becoming, she smiled. He looked at her smile, the way people look at rare things. They ordered food and ate at the long table among the drawings, and talked the way they always talked, about the project, about cities, about the nature of spaces that make people feel human. And underneath the talking was something new, something that had always been there, but was no longer required to pretend otherwise. An ease, a warmth, the particular relief of two people who have stopped negotiating the distance between them and have simply, finally, closed it. At one point, he reached across the table and turned over one of her drawings to look at something on the reverse side, and his hand brushed hers, and neither of them moved away. They left it. Daniel Hale's name appeared in the financial news 2 weeks later, in a context that had nothing to do with Serena. A deal he had been quietly constructing for 8 months, a significant acquisition that had been the centerpiece of his company's next phase, had fallen through. The other party had walked away. The reasons were not fully public, but the people who moved in the relevant rooms understood the shape of it. A man who had spent 6 months demonstrating poor judgment in his personal life had found that professional trust, which is always partly personal, had shifted around him. Serena read the item once on her phone on a Tuesday morning. She set the phone down. She felt nothing dramatic, not triumph, not satisfaction, exactly, something quieter and more final than satisfaction. The particular feeling of a chapter that has ended not with a dramatic last line, but simply by running out of pages. She thought about him, briefly and completely, the man at the altar, the man in the rain, the man across the marble table, and she let herself feel the full weight of the loss of what she had believed that man to be, not what he was, what she had believed. The loss of the belief was its own grief, separate from the loss of the person, and it deserved to be felt separately. She felt it, then she set it down. She picked up her pencil and went back to work. The groundbreaking for the waterfront project was in March. It was a clear morning, the kind of early spring day that New York produces occasionally as though apologizing for winter, sharp blue sky, the river going silver in the light, the air cold but no longer hostile. There were city officials and investors and journalists. and the particular crowd that attends groundbreakings with the energy of people who want to be photographed near significant things. Serena wore her slate, gray wool coat and stood at the edge of the platform that had been constructed for the ceremony and looked at the site. The waterfront, the river, the city behind it, the sky above it, and thought about everything that had been required to arrive at this particular morning. All of it, every piece of it. Marcus was beside her, not performing proximity, just beside her, standing in the way he stood, with that quality of complete presence that she had stopped finding unnerving and had started finding, instead, like home. Patricia gave a brief speech. An official said official things. Someone handed Serena a ceremonial shovel, which she accepted without irony, because irony was a form of distance, and she was done with distance. When she drove the shovel into the ground, the first turn of earth, the beginning of something real that would stand in this place for 100 years, she felt it in her whole body. The beginning, the specific, irreversible, entirely hers beginning of something she had earned with every hard thing she had survived. She looked up. Marcus was watching her, not the ceremony, not the photographers, not the officials. Her. She held his gaze for a moment across the bright March air. Then she turned back to the site, to the river, to the sky, to the thing she was building. That evening, they walked along the waterfront, after the crowd had gone. The river moved beside them, the lights of the bridges doubled in the water, the city going blue in the early evening. They walked without agenda, just walking, the way people walk when they have nowhere specific to be, and are exactly where they want to be. She told him about her mother, about growing up in the house in Connecticut with Claudia and the particular pressure of a family that loved in the specific way that families sometimes love, completely, imperfectly, with damage and good intention tangled together in ways that take decades to separate. He told her about Singapore, about the server room and the first company and the version of himself that had existed at 22, hungry and certain and entirely unaware of how much he didn't know. He laughed once at something about his 22-year-old certainty, and she heard the laugh and felt something bloom in her chest that was simple and warm and real. She had called Claudia the week before. The call had been short. Not warm yet. Warmth was going to take time, was going to require more conversations and more honesty and the slow rebuilding of something that had been deliberately damaged. But it had been real. Claudia had cried. Serena had not. She had done her crying her one time in the window seat with the tea. She had listened, and she had said what she meant, and she had ended the call with, "I'll call again next week." She was going to call again next week, not because the damage was undone, because she was not interested in carrying the weight of an unfinished thing for the rest of her life, and because she understood now, had earned the right to understand, that forgiveness was not absolution and love was not unconditional, and family was not a debt but a choice you made again, differently, with better information. She was making it. She told Marcus about the call. He listened without interrupting. When she finished, he said, "That took courage. It took tiredness," she said. "I was tired of carrying it. That's what courage usually is," he said. "Tiredness that decides to move forward anyway." She looked at him, at his profile against the darkening water, at the way the bridge lights caught the silver at his temples. At the man, he was complicated and controlled and tender in ways he had learned to protect because tenderness had cost him once, and he was still, carefully, learning to offer it again. She thought about the server room at 22, the engagement, the CFO, the 18 months of rebuilding, the years of distance after that, the careful professional architecture, the company that had grown enormous partly because he had poured into it everything he might otherwise have poured into a life. She thought about herself at 22, at 28, when she had met Daniel, at 31, when she had stood at the altar and believed it completely. She thought about the conference room, the pen, the sound of her heels on the marble. She thought about the elevator going down, the black car in the rain, the city blurring past the window. She thought about all of it, the whole long thread of it, every loss and every building and everything survived. And she felt, with a clarity so simple it was almost shocking, that every single piece of it had been necessary, not justified by outcome in some tidy narrative way, just necessary. The specific path, the only path that led here, to this river this evening, this man beside her. She slipped her hand into his. He looked down at their hands, then up at her. He said nothing. She said nothing. They kept walking. The river moved beside them, and the lights doubled in the dark water, and the city went on being the city, vast and indifferent and full of a million lives moving through their private histories, their private losses, their private and irreplaceable moments of choosing to lean towards something despite the fear. Much later, at the door of her building, they stood in the cold March air, and she looked up at him and thought about all the things she could say, all the things that were true, all the things she had been building toward, all the words that had been accumulating in her for months like water behind a dam. She did not say any of them. She reached up and put her hand against his jaw, the way she had in the studio, and she felt him still beneath her touch, the same way, as though her hand was the thing that quieted him most completely in the world. She kissed him softly, briefly, the cold air around them, the city behind them, the river 2 blocks away moving in the dark. When she pulled back, he was looking at her with an expression she had no word for, something that was wonder and relief, and the specific deep emotion of a man who has waited for something long enough that receiving it feels like the most serious thing that has ever happened to him. "Good night, Marcus," she said. "Good night," he said. She went inside. She was almost to the elevator when her phone buzzed. She looked at it. A message from a number she didn't recognize. 3 words, no name. "We need to talk." She looked at the message. Looked at it for a long moment in the marble lobby of her building, with the night outside the glass doors and the elevator waiting and the warm life of her apartment somewhere above her. She thought about the handwriting style, the brevity, the particular 3-word construction that she had received in various forms, at various turning points in her life, always from the same source. Her mother. She hadn't spoken to her mother about any of it. Not the board, not Claudia, not the photograph, not the project, not Marcus. Her mother, who had been sick last year and was better now, who lived in the Connecticut house with the particular silence of a woman who has outlived several versions of her own life, and watching her daughters navigate theirs. "We need to talk." Serena stood in the lobby and felt the thread. The one small open thread, the unanswered question, pull taut. She put the phone in her pocket. She pressed the elevator button, the doors opened, she stepped inside. She looked at her own face in the polished metal of the elevator doors, her dark hair, her steady eyes, her coat still on, her hand still warm from his. The doors closed. She rose.